I never thought a stupid propane heater would become the center of a legal battle that would expose our homeowners association president for what she really was. But here we are. My name is Marcus Quinlan, and I made the mistake of buying a house in Ridgewood Estates, a planned community in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. The neighborhood looked perfect when I toured it back in August. Manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, friendly neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. What I didn't realize was that beneath that picture-perfect surface lurked an HOA president named Patricia who treated the community bylaws like they were handed down from Mount Sinai itself. I moved into my 3-bedroom colonial in early September, right as summer was fading into fall. Everything seemed fine at first. I kept my lawn trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches, parked my car in the garage like the rules stated, and even made sure my trash cans were the approved beige color. I thought I was being a model resident. Then October hit, and with it came an early cold snap that dropped temperatures into the low 40s at night. My house had central heating, sure, but there was a problem. The system was old, and while the home inspector had noted it needed updating, he'd said it was still functional for now. What he hadn't mentioned was that the furnace ate through natural gas like a starving bear and barely kept the upstairs bedrooms above 65 degrees. I work from home as a software developer, and my office is in one of those upstairs bedrooms. Trying to code with numb fingers is about as fun as it sounds, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to Home Depot and bought a small propane heater. Nothing crazy, just a Mr. Heater portable unit that put out 9,000 BTUs. It had all the safety features, an automatic shutoff if it tipped over, an oxygen depletion sensor, the works. I set it up in my office, cracked a window for ventilation like the manual said, and finally, my workspace was comfortable. That worked great for exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, I came home from grabbing lunch to find a fluorescent orange violation notice stuck to my front door. The paper was so bright it practically glowed, and I could see it from the street. I pulled it off and read the message typed in aggressive all caps, "Violation notice." Homeowner Marcus Quinlan, of 847 Maple Ridge Drive, has been observed storing hazardous materials on the property in violation of Section 7.3 of the Ridgewood Estates HOA covenants. The propane tank visible through the upstairs window constitutes a fire hazard and must be removed within 48 hours or a fine of $100 per day will be assessed. I stared at the notice, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Someone had been looking through my window. My second-story window. I glanced up at my office and realized that yes, if you stood in just the right spot in my neighbor's driveway, you could probably see the small green propane cylinder sitting next to my heater. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA management number listed at the bottom of the notice. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Ridgewood Estates, HOA, this is Patricia speaking." "Hi, Patricia. This is Marcus Quinlan from 847 Maple Ridge. I just got a violation notice about a propane heater, and I think there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Quinlan." Her voice was clipped and sharp, like she was used to people challenging her and enjoyed shutting them down. "I personally observed the propane tank through your window during my neighborhood inspection yesterday." "You were inspecting my windows." "I inspect the entire neighborhood 3 times a week to ensure compliance with our community standards." The propane tank is clearly visible and represents a significant safety hazard. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. It's a small portable heater with every safety feature imaginable. People use these things in their homes all the time. Not in Ridgewood Estates, they don't. Section 7.3 of our covenants explicitly prohibits the storage of flammable materials. I'm not storing it, I'm using it. And technically, natural gas is flammable too, and that's piped into every house here. Mr. Quinlan, I don't appreciate your argumentative tone. Patricia's voice went even colder. The violation stands. You have 48 hours to remove the hazardous materials or face daily fines. If you wish to contest this violation, you may submit a written appeal to be heard at next month's HOA board meeting. Next month. It's October 3rd. The next meeting isn't until November 7th. What am I supposed to do about heating my office in the meantime? That sounds like a personal problem. Fix your central heating system like a responsible homeowner. Good day, Mr. Quinlan. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on my front porch, holding my phone and the obnoxious orange notice, feeling my blood pressure rising. The rational part of my brain told me to just comply, box up the heater, and suffer through cold mornings until I could get the furnace replaced. But another part of me, the part that had dealt with too many petty tyrants in my life, absolutely refused to let this woman win. I went inside and dug out my closing paperwork, finding the copy of the HOA covenants and restrictions. Section 7.3 did indeed prohibit the storage of hazardous materials, but it specifically listed things like gasoline, diesel fuel, and industrial chemicals. The section was clearly written with the intent of preventing people from keeping 50-gallon drums of gas in their garages, not small portable heaters. I spent the next hour drafting a detailed response letter, citing the specific language of the covenant, pointing out that propane heaters are approved for indoor use by the manufacturer and meet all safety standards, and requesting a temporary exemption until I could afford to replace my furnace. I printed it out, drove to Patricia's house at 923 Oak Valley Court, and put it in her mailbox. The next morning, I found another orange notice on my door. Second violation notice. Your written response has been received and denied. The propane tank must be removed immediately. You now have 24 hours before fines begin accruing. The HOA board stands united in prioritizing the safety of our community. I called an emergency meeting with my next-door neighbor, Jeff, who had lived in Ridgewood for 5 years. He was in his backyard raking leaves when I walked over. Hey Jeff, can I ask you something about the HOA? He looked up and actually grimaced. Let me guess. Patricia. How'd you know? She's the only reason anyone ever wants to talk about the HOA. What you do wrong? I explained the situation with the heater. Jeff leaned on his rake and shook his head. Yeah, that sounds like her. Patricia Hendricks has been HOA president for 3 years now, and she's gotten worse every year. Started out just enforcing the obvious stuff, but now she's on this power trip where she interprets every rule in the strictest possible way. Can she actually fine me $100 a day for a portable heater? If the board backs her up, yeah, and they usually do. Bill Morrison and Susan Chen are the other 2 board members, and they basically just rubber stamp whatever Patricia wants. I think they're afraid of her. So what do I do? Jeff thought for a moment. Honestly, either comply and freeze your butt off or lawyer up. Those are pretty much your only options with Patricia. She doesn't back down, doesn't compromise, doesn't see reason. There has to be something. Can't I call for a special board meeting or something? You can try, but you'd need signatures from 20% of the homeowners, and good luck getting that. Most people around here just want to keep their heads down and avoid becoming Patricia's next target. I thanked Jeff for his time and went back inside, feeling defeated. That afternoon, I moved the heater down to my basement where it couldn't be seen from outside. It didn't help my office temperature, but at least it would stop the violation notices. The next week was miserable. I wore 2 sweaters while working and kept a blanket over my lap. My productivity tanked because my fingers were stiff from the cold. I got quotes on replacing the furnace, and they all came back between $6,000 and $8,000. Money I didn't exactly have lying around 3 months after buying a house. Then came October 15th, and everything changed. I woke up that Tuesday morning to find my house absolutely frigid. I checked the thermostat and it read 58 degrees. I went down to the basement to check the furnace and it was dead, completely non-functional. I tried the normal troubleshooting stuff, checking the pilot light, making sure the gas valve was open, hitting the reset button. Nothing worked. I called an HVAC company and they said they could send someone out in 2 days. 2 days of living in a 50-degree house. I was about to haul my propane heater back upstairs. Patricia be damned when my phone rang. It was Jeff. "Hey Marcus, is your heat working?" "No, actually. Furnace died this morning." "Why?" "Same here. I just talked to the Chens across the street and they're out too." I think something's wrong with the neighborhood's gas system. That got my attention. Ridgewood Estates was built with a private natural gas distribution system that connected to the city's main supply line. Instead of each house having its own meter connected directly to the city system, there was a central distribution point that the HOA maintained, and then smaller lines ran to each house. It was supposed to be more efficient or something, though personally I thought it was just another way for the HOA to have control over something. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook group was blowing up. 37 houses reported no gas service, no heat, no hot water, no gas stoves. The common thread was that we were all on the north side of the development. At 2 p.m., Patricia posted an announcement. "Attention Ridgewood Estates residents. We are aware of the natural gas service disruption affecting homes on the north side of the development. A technician has been contacted and will assess the situation tomorrow morning. In the meantime, please conserve energy and dress warmly. The HOA appreciates your patience during this unfortunate situation. Tomorrow morning." We were supposed to just deal with no heat for 24 hours because the HOA couldn't get someone out until the next day. I commented on the post asking why we couldn't get emergency service today, and Patricia responded within minutes. The gas system is not considered a life-threatening emergency. Normal service call procedures apply. Please refrain from creating panic in the community. The temperature that night dropped to 39 degrees. Inside my house, it got down to 53. I slept in my warmest clothes under every blanket I owned and still shivered all night. Wednesday morning, I watched from my window as a van from Davidson Gas Services pulled up to the central distribution point, which was housed in a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance. A technician spent about an hour there, then left. Patricia posted another update at 11 a.m., update on gas service. The technician has identified a failed pressure regulator in the main distribution system. A replacement part has been ordered and should arrive by end of business Friday. Service should be restored by Friday evening or Saturday morning at the latest. Thank you for your continued patience. Friday. It was Wednesday morning. She was telling us we'd be without heat for potentially 3 more days. The comments exploded. People demanded to know why the HOA didn't keep spare parts on hand for critical infrastructure. Others asked about getting hotel rooms that the HOA would pay for. Someone pointed out that there were 2 families with infants in the affected area. Patricia's response was tone-deaf, even by her standards. The HOA budget does not allow for maintaining an inventory of specialized equipment parts. Residents are responsible for their own temporary heating arrangements. I remind everyone that this is an unfortunate accident and not the result of any negligence on the part of the HOA board. That last sentence made me see red. Not negligence. They maintained the gas system, they were responsible for it, and they didn't even have a contingency plan for when it failed. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. It took me about 20 minutes to find out that under North Carolina law, HOAs that maintain common infrastructure like gas or water systems are required to have emergency response plans and maintain adequate reserves for repairs. They're also required to carry insurance that covers loss of service. I documented everything I found and posted it in the Facebook group, along with a simple question. Did the HOA actually have an emergency response plan like they were legally required to? Patricia didn't respond, but Susan Chen, one of the board members, did. These matters are handled internally by the board. Residents should not be spreading legal speculation that could create liability issues. That response told me everything I needed to know. They didn't have a plan. They'd been cutting corners on their legal obligations. Wednesday afternoon, I hauled my propane heater back upstairs. If Patricia wanted to fine me while people were freezing in their homes because of the HOA's negligence, she was welcome to try. I'd be happy to see her in court. The heater worked beautifully. My office warmed up to a comfortable 70 degrees within an hour. I actually got some work done for the first time in days. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing on my porch, her face pinched with anger. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, HOA president. Mid-50s, severely cut blonde hair with dark roots showing, wearing expensive athleisure wear despite clearly never having exercised in her life, and carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Mr. Quinlan, I can see the propane heater through your window again. I know, I need heat, and the HOA's gas system is broken. That doesn't give you the right to violate community covenants. I'm here to formally notify you that, as of tomorrow morning, you'll be accruing fines of $100 per day until that hazard is removed. Patricia, there are families with babies who don't have heat because the HOA failed to maintain the system properly. And you're worried about my legally purchased, manufacturer-approved heater. The gas system failure is a separate issue. Your violation remains a violation regardless of other circumstances. Then fine me. I'll see you in court, and we can discuss in front of a judge why the HOA doesn't have the legally required emergency response plan for infrastructure failures. Her eyes narrowed. Are you threatening legal action against the HOA? I'm stating facts. You want to fine me? Go ahead. But I'm not freezing because you're on a power trip. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked back to her Mercedes SUV without another word. I watched her drive away, feeling both triumphant and nervous. I'd basically just declared war on my HOA president. Thursday came and went with no heat restoration. The temperature dropped to 37 overnight. I was comfortable in my office, but I felt guilty knowing my neighbors were suffering. I posted in the Facebook group letting people know that if anyone needed to warm up, especially families with kids, they were welcome to come to my house. 3 families took me up on it over the course of Thursday. The Chens brought their 6-month-old daughter over for a few hours. A couple from 2 streets over, the Washingtons, came by with their twin toddlers. And an elderly man named Robert from the corner house spent most of the afternoon in my living room, grateful for the warmth. He told me he'd lived in Ridgewood for 12 years and had never seen Patricia this bad. She used to be reasonable, he said, sipping the hot coffee I'd made him. But something changed about 2 years ago. She got mean. started treating every little thing like a personal offense. "Someone needs to vote her out," I said. "Elections are in January." "But she's run unopposed the last 2 terms. Nobody wants the job, and honestly, most people are scared she'll make their lives hell if they run against her." By Friday morning, people were really getting angry. The temperature had dropped to 33 degrees overnight, just barely above freezing. Inside my house, it would have been in the low 50s without my heater. People were posting in the Facebook group about pipes freezing, about elderly parents who couldn't stay warm, about astronomical electric bills from running space heaters. Patricia posted another update at 10 a.m. Update: "The replacement part has arrived and installation will begin this afternoon. We expect service to be restored by early Saturday morning. The board appreciates everyone's patience during this challenging time." Someone commented asking if the HOA would be compensating residents for the inconvenience, and Patricia responded that the covenants contained a clause limiting HOA liability for infrastructure failures. I decided to do some more digging. I filed a public records request with the county for the HOA's incorporation documents and bylaws. I also started looking into Patricia's background, which felt a little creepy, but also necessary at this point. What I found was interesting. Patricia Hendricks had been elected HOA president 3 years ago after the previous president moved away. For the first year, meeting minutes showed reasonable discussions and normal community business. But starting about 2 years ago, the tone changed. Patricia started pushing through rule changes without proper votes. She'd increased violation fines significantly. She'd also given herself a substantial increase in the administrative stipend that the HOA president received. It wasn't a salary exactly, but it was $1,500 a month, which seemed excessive for a neighborhood of 80 houses. I documented everything and saved it to a folder on my laptop. Friday afternoon, I watched another Davidson Gas Services van arrive. This time, 2 technicians got out and headed into the distribution building. They were there for 3 hours. At one point, I saw Patricia drive up and talk to them, and even from a distance, I could see her gesturing angrily. The sun set with still no gas service restored. Saturday morning dawned cold and clear. I checked my thermostat out of habit and nearly fell over when I saw the furnace had kicked on. We had heat again. The gas service had been restored sometime during the night. I checked the Facebook group and saw Patricia had posted an update at 6 a.m. Natural gas service restored. All affected homes should now have service. The HOA apologizes for the extended outage and thanks everyone for their patience. Normal community operations resume as of today. The comments were not friendly. People wanted answers about why it had taken so long. They wanted to know what the HOA was going to do to prevent this from happening again. They wanted compensation for spoiled food, hotel costs, and electric bills. Patricia responded to none of them. What she did instead was post a new message at 9 a.m. Violation notice for Marcus Quinlan. Mr. Quinlan of 847 Maple Ridge Drive has accumulated fines totaling $300 for continued storage of hazardous materials, despite multiple warnings. Payment is due within 30 days. Continued violation will result in additional fines and potential legal action. She was seriously trying to fine me $300 after her negligence had left dozens of families without heat for 3 days. I snapped. I spent Saturday afternoon putting together a detailed post for the Facebook group. I laid out everything I'd found about North Carolina HOA law, the requirement for emergency response plans, the evidence that Patricia had been mismanaging HOA funds, the excessive administrative stipend she'd given herself, And the fact that she was trying to fine me for using a safe, legal heater while the system she was responsible for was broken. I ended with a call to action. I wrote that we needed to call a special meeting of all homeowners to discuss the board's handling of the gas system failure and to potentially vote on removing Patricia from the board. According to the bylaws, we needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to call a special meeting. With 80 houses in the development, that meant 16 signatures. I posted it Saturday evening. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my post had been deleted and I'd been removed from the Facebook group. Patricia was the administrator, so she could do that, but the damage was done. My phone started ringing at 8 a.m. with neighbors calling to say they wanted to sign the petition. By noon, I had 23 signatures. I delivered the petition to Patricia's house Sunday afternoon. She answered the door in yoga pants and an irritated expression. "Mr. Quinlan, what do you want?" "I'm formally requesting a special homeowners meeting pursuant to Article 5, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws. I have signatures from 23 homeowners, well above the required threshold." I handed her the document. She looked at it like I'd handed her a dead fish. "This is completely inappropriate. The board handled the gas situation appropriately, and your attempts to create chaos in the community are noted. The law requires you to schedule the meeting within 2 weeks of receiving a valid petition. I'd like it scheduled for Saturday, October 26th at 10 a.m. in the community center. I'll schedule it when I determine it's appropriate. Patricia, the bylaws are very clear. You have to schedule it within 14 days or homeowners can file a complaint with the county. Do you really want to add that to your list of legal problems?" Her face went red. "Are you threatening me? I'm informing you of the rules that you're supposedly so concerned with following. See you at the meeting, Patricia." I walked away before she could respond. The next 2 weeks were tense. Patricia sent me a formal letter saying my violation fines had increased to $500 due to continued non-compliance. I responded with my own letter saying I would not pay any fines and looked forward to discussing the matter at the special meeting. She also tried to claim that the special meeting petition was invalid because some signatures were illegible. But when I threatened to file a complaint with the county, she backed down and officially scheduled the meeting for Saturday, October 26th at 10 a.m. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I made copies of all my research. I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes just to make sure I had my facts straight. I also talked to as many neighbors as possible, building support for a motion to remove Patricia from the board. What I found was that almost everyone had a Patricia story. She'd fined the Washingtons for having their trash cans visible from the street for 15 minutes. She'd threatened the Chens with legal action because their maple tree dropped leaves into the neighbor's yard. She'd sent violation notices to Robert because his lawn was 2 3/4 inches tall instead of 2.5. The list went on, but I also found something more concerning. I talked to Linda Martinez, who had been HOA treasurer until 6 months ago when she'd resigned. Linda lived on the south side of the development and hadn't been affected by the gas outage, but she'd been following the drama. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she said when I visited her house on Wednesday evening. "But it stays between us until the meeting, okay? Of course." The reason I resigned as treasurer is because Patricia was misusing HOA funds. Not a lot, not enough to be obvious, but she was charging personal expenses to the HOA credit card and then approving them herself. Dinners, shopping trips, even a weekend at a resort that she claimed was an HOA conference but wasn't. "Do you have proof?" "I have copies of 6 months of credit card statements that I kept before I resigned. I was going to file a complaint, but honestly, I was afraid of her. Patricia is vindictive, and I didn't want to become her target. Would you be willing to share those statements at the meeting? Linda hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think I would. This gas thing, leaving families in the cold for days, that crossed a line. Someone needs to stop her. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. I got to the community center at 9:30 to set up. The community center was a small building near the neighborhood pool, basically just a large room with a kitchen attached. It had a capacity of about 60 people, and I was hoping we'd fill it. By 9:45, people were streaming in. By 10 a.m., we had 57 people packed into the room, which represented about 70% of the households in Ridgewood Estates. It was standing room only. Patricia arrived at exactly 10 a.m. with Bill Morrison and Susan Chen flanking her. She looked around the room with obvious displeasure at the turnout, then made her way to the front, where a folding table and chairs had been set up. She called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table, which seemed excessively dramatic. This special meeting of the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association has been called to order. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that proper decorum will be maintained. Outbursts or disrespectful behavior will result in removal from the meeting. Someone in the back yelled, "We'll see who gets removed." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she continued. The petition for this meeting cited concerns about the board's handling of the recent gas service disruption. I'll begin by stating for the record that the board acted appropriately and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. The gas system failure was an unforeseeable equipment malfunction, and we responded as quickly as possible given the circumstances. I raised my hand. Patricia looked at me like I was a particularly annoying insect but nodded. "Mr. Quinlan." I stood up. "Patricia, you stated the board acted in accordance with all applicable laws. Are you aware that North Carolina General Statute 47 F3 104 requires HOAs that maintain common infrastructure to have documented emergency response plans? We have procedures in place for emergencies. Can you provide documentation of those procedures?" Because I filed a records request and received no such documentation, Patricia's face reddened. Emergency procedures are maintained internally by the board. So you don't have a written plan. We have protocols that we follow. That's not what the statute requires. It requires a documented, written emergency response plan that includes contact information for emergency service providers, notification procedures for residents, and provisions for temporary services if the outage extends beyond 24 hours. Do you have any of that? The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching Patricia, whose face was now approaching burgundy. The board will review the statute you cited and ensure compliance going forward. So that's a no. You left 57 families without heat for 3 days because you didn't have the legally required emergency plan in place. The gas failure was not the board's fault, Mr. Quinlan. Equipment fails. That's not negligence. Linda stood up from her seat near the front. But not maintaining the equipment properly is negligence. Patricia, when was the last time the gas distribution system was inspected? Patricia looked at Linda with obvious surprise. We have it inspected according to the manufacturer's recommendations. Which are what? Annual inspections. Because I was treasurer until 6 months ago, and I never saw an invoice for gas system inspection in the 3 years before that. The room erupted. People started shouting questions at Patricia. She banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We will have order!" Bill Morrison, who had been silent until now, leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She listened, then whispered back. They had a brief, heated conversation while the room watched. Finally, Patricia spoke again. The board will conduct a full review of all maintenance records for the gas system. If there were any oversights, they will be corrected. But that doesn't change the fact that we responded to this emergency appropriately once it occurred. You told people with babies and elderly parents to just dress warmly and wait 3 days, someone shouted from the middle of the room. We got service restored as quickly as possible. You didn't offer hotel vouchers. You didn't rent temporary heaters. You didn't do anything except tell people to deal with it, another voice called out. I stood up again. Patricia, I'd like to make a formal motion. I move that the homeowners present vote to remove you as HOA president due to mismanagement of community resources, failure to maintain legally required emergency procedures, and general incompetence in handling the recent gas system crisis. The room exploded with voices. Some people cheered. Others started arguing. Patricia banged her gavel so hard I thought it might break the table. You cannot make that motion. Removal of board members requires a formal complaint process and a hearing. I pulled out a copy of the bylaws. Article 8, Section 2. Board members can be removed by a 2/3 vote of homeowners at any special or regular meeting, provided the removal is listed on the meeting agenda. I included it in the petition that called this meeting, which means it's on the agenda. Patricia looked at Bill and Susan in panic. Bill pulled out his own copy of the bylaws and started flipping through it. After a moment, he looked up and nodded reluctantly. He's right. That's what it says. This is a witch hunt. Patricia stood up, her voice shaking with anger. I have served this community faithfully for 3 years. I have maintained our property values, enforced our standards, and kept this neighborhood from becoming a chaotic mess. And this is the thanks I get. Being attacked by someone who can't even follow basic safety rules. You mean the basic safety rule of providing heat to people's homes. Jeff shouted from his seat. Linda stood up again. Patricia, before we vote, there's something else the community needs to know. While I was treasurer, I documented multiple instances of you using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. Dinners, shopping trips, even a weekend trip to a spa resort in Asheville that you claimed was an HOA conference but wasn't. The room went silent again. Patricia's face drained of color. That's a lie. I never misused HOA funds. Linda held up a folder. I have 6 months of credit card statements right here. $370 at Fleming Steakhouse for dinner for 2 on a Tuesday evening. $215 at Nordstrom. $647 for a weekend at the Grove Park Inn during a weekend when there were no HOA conferences anywhere in the state. Those were legitimate HOA expenses. The dinner was with a potential vendor. The clothing was for HOA events. The resort was for business development. Really? Because the HOA never hired any new vendors during that time, and you never disclosed any of these expenses to the board or the membership. I asked you about them multiple times and you told me to mind my own business. That's why I resigned. Susan Chen stood up, looking shocked. Patricia, is this true? Did you use HOA funds for personal expenses? Everything I charged was related to HOA business in some way. Then you should have disclosed them and gotten approval from the full board. That's standard procedure for any organization. You know that. Bill Morrison was looking at Patricia like he'd never seen her before. How much are we talking about total, Linda? Linda flipped through her folder. In the 6 months I documented, approximately $4,000 in questionable charges. I don't know what happened after I resigned. $4,000. Out of a community of 80 houses paying $600 a year in HOA dues, that was a huge chunk of the annual budget. Patricia sat down heavily, her face now gray. This is all being taken out of context. I can explain every single charge. I'm sure you can, I said. And I'm sure the county prosecutor will be very interested in hearing those explanations, because what Linda is describing sounds a lot like embezzlement. That word hung in the air like a bomb. Embezzlement. A criminal charge, not just an HOA dispute. Patricia's eyes went wide. I didn't embezzle anything. Those were legitimate expenses. Then you'll be able to prove that. But right now, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of removing Patricia Hendricks as HOA president, please raise your hands. Hands shot up all over the room. I did a quick count. 41 people out of 57 present. All opposed. 5 hands went up, including Susan and Bill, who looked deeply uncomfortable. The motion passes. Patricia, you're no longer president of this HOA. Patricia stood up, grabbed her purse, and looked around the room with an expression that mixed humiliation and rage. You people are going to regret this. I'll sue every single one of you for defamation. I'll make your lives miserable. I think you've already done that, Jeff called out. Patricia stormed out of the community center, slamming the door so hard the whole building shook. The room erupted in conversation. Susan and Bill looked shell-shocked. Linda was surrounded by people thanking her for speaking up. I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. We spent the next hour conducting emergency business. We voted Bill Morrison as temporary HOA president until a proper election could be held in January. We passed a motion requiring all HOA expenses over $100 to be approved by at least 2 board members. We passed another motion requiring monthly financial statements to be posted in the community newsletter. And we passed a motion directing the new board to immediately hire a qualified company to inspect and service the gas distribution system, and to develop a proper emergency response plan. We also voted to forgive all fines that Patricia had assessed in the last 6 months, including mine, pending a review to determine if they were legitimate or just Patricia being vindictive. By noon, we were done. People filed out slowly, stopping to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. Robert, the elderly man who'd warmed up in my house during the outage, gave me a hug. Thank you, son. That woman made my life hell for 2 years. As people were leaving, a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police patrol car pulled up outside. 2 officers got out and came into the community center. One of them, a tall black officer with sergeant stripes, looked around. We're looking for Patricia Hendricks. Is she here? Bill Morrison stepped forward. She left about an hour ago. Can I ask what this is about? We have some questions about potential misuse of HOA funds. We received a complaint earlier this week. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't filed a police complaint. Who had? Linda raised her hand tentatively. That was me. I filed a report on Wednesday after talking to Marcus. I couldn't let it go anymore, the sergeant nodded. We'll need to speak with Miss Hendricks and also with you, madam, to get copies of those financial records you mentioned in your report. Of course. I can do that right now if you want. The officers took Linda's statement and copies of her documents, then left to find Patricia. The community center emptied out after that, leaving just me, Bill, Susan, and a couple of other neighbors to clean up. Bill approached me as I was folding chairs. Marcus, I owe you an apology. I should have stood up to Patricia a long time ago. I knew she was getting out of control, but I just went along with it because it was easier than fighting her. Why didn't you say something? He sighed. Honestly, I was intimidated. Patricia has this way of making you feel like you're stupid if you disagree with her. And she'd hint that she'd make your life difficult if you opposed her on anything. It was easier to just nod and vote yes. That's not how HOAs are supposed to work. I know. and I'm going to do better going forward. Starting with getting that gas system properly maintained and getting us in compliance with all the regulations we've apparently been ignoring. Over the next week, the story played out in ways I couldn't have predicted. The police investigation into Patricia moved quickly. It turned out that Linda's 6 months of documentation was just the tip of the iceberg. When the police got access to the full HOA financial records, they found that Patricia had been systematically misusing funds for nearly 2 years. The total came to almost $19,000. Some of it was semi-legitimate, like expensive dinners that might have had some HOA connection. But a lot of it was blatant personal spending charged to the HOA credit card. Patricia was arrested on Thursday, October 31st. The charge was embezzlement, a Class H felony in North Carolina. She posted bail and immediately hired an expensive lawyer, but the evidence was overwhelming. The story made the local news. HOA president arrested for embezzlement after heating crisis was the headline on Channel 9 website. The reporter interviewed several Ridgewood residents, including me. I kept my comments brief, just saying that the community was working to rebuild trust and improve our management practices. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in going easy on her. HOA embezzlement was apparently a bigger problem than I'd realized, and they wanted to send a message. The case went to trial in February. I had to testify about the gas system failure and Patricia's mismanagement of the situation. Linda testified about the financial irregularities she discovered. The HOA's bank statements and credit card records were entered into evidence. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she genuinely believed her expenses were legitimate HOA business, but the jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on March 12th of embezzlement and 2 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA plus penalties. The total came to $34,000, which Patricia would be paying off for years. Meanwhile, back in Ridgewood Estates, things improved dramatically. Bill Morrison turned out to be a competent and reasonable HOA president. One of his first acts was to hire a professional management company to handle the day-to-day operations, which meant no single person had unilateral control anymore. They brought in a gas system specialist who did a full inspection and found multiple problems. The pressure regulator that had failed was original to the neighborhood's construction 12 years ago and should have been replaced years ago. There were also corrosion issues in several sections of pipe. The repairs cost the HOA $42,000, which required a special assessment of $525 per household. Nobody was happy about that, but everyone understood it was necessary. The management company also implemented a proper maintenance schedule and emergency response plan. Now there were regular inspections, and if there's ever another outage, there's a clear protocol for notifying residents, providing temporary solutions, and getting service restored quickly. As for my propane heater fine, that got dismissed immediately after Patricia was removed from the board. Bill even apologized personally for the whole situation. I told him it wasn't his fault, which was mostly true. I used my heater for the rest of the winter without any complaints from anyone. In March, I finally got around to replacing my old furnace with a new high-efficiency system that keeps my whole house comfortable without costing a fortune. The new system has a 10-year warranty and actually works properly, which is a nice change. The HOA elections in January saw a complete turnover. Bill Morrison chose not to run for president, saying he'd done his duty as emergency president and was ready to let someone else take over. A woman named Alina Reeves, who had a background in nonprofit management, ran for president and won easily. Susan Chen got voted off the board and was replaced by Jeff, my neighbor, who I'd convinced to run. The new board has been night and day compared to Patricia's regime. They're transparent about finances. They communicate regularly with residents, and they enforce rules in a reasonable way. When the Washington's teenage son accidentally left their trash cans out overnight, Alina just sent them a friendly reminder text instead of a formal violation notice. The neighborhood feels less like a police state and more like an actual community. I still live in Ridgewood Estates, and honestly, I've grown to like it here now that Patricia is gone. The neighbors are friendly, the location is convenient, and my house is comfortable. I've even joined the Architectural Review Committee, which approves exterior modifications to homes. We approved a new color of shutters just last week without any drama whatsoever. Patricia would have had an aneurysm. The whole experience taught me a lot about HOAs and community governance. The structure itself isn't inherently bad. Having some basic standards and shared maintenance of common areas makes sense. The problem is when you get someone like Patricia who sees the HOA presidency as a personal fiefdom instead of a service position. The rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. It also taught me not to back down when someone abuses their authority. If I just complied with Patricia's unreasonable demand and frozen in my house, she'd still be running roughshod over everyone in Ridgewood. Standing up to her was uncomfortable and stressful, but it was worth it. I still have my propane heater, sitting in my basement as a backup in case my new furnace ever fails. Every time I see it, I think about those 3 cold days in October when our HOA's negligence left dozens of families without heat, and how Patricia tried to find me for finding a solution to the problem she'd created. The irony is almost poetic. She spent so much energy trying to punish me for a safe, legal heater that I was using because of her board's failure to maintain the neighborhood's heating system. She was so focused on wielding power over me that she didn't realize she was exposing herself to scrutiny that would eventually uncover her embezzlement and end her reign as HOA tyrant. Sometimes I wonder if Patricia learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like her rarely do. They're so convinced of their own righteousness that they can't see how their behavior affects others. She probably still thinks she was in the right, that she was just enforcing the rules and everyone else was being unreasonable. But that's not my problem anymore. Patricia Hendricks is a convicted felon with a prison record and a massive debt to repay. Her HOA presidency is over, and Ridgewood Estates is a better place without her. As for me, I'm just a guy who bought a house and wanted to keep his office warm. I never set out to take down an HOA president or expose embezzlement. I just wanted to use my legally purchased heater in peace. But when someone abuses their authority and makes life miserable for everyone around them, sometimes you have to push back. Looking back on everything that happened between that first orange violation notice and Patricia's conviction, I'm glad I didn't back down. It would have been easier to comply to avoid the conflict, to keep my head down like so many others had done. But easy isn't always right. The whole situation could have been avoided if Patricia had just been a reasonable person. If she'd focused on actual community issues instead of power trips over portable heaters. If she'd maintained the gas system properly instead of embezzling HOA funds. If she'd responded to the heating crisis with competence and compassion instead of dismissiveness and more threats. But she didn't, and now she's paying the price. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in my comfortable office, heated by my perfectly functional new furnace, writing this story on my laptop while looking out the window at a neighborhood that's finally living up to its potential. The lawns are still maintained, the sidewalks are still clean, and property values are still good. But now we have leadership that actually cares about the residents instead of just wielding power for its own sake. And if anyone ever tries to find me for a propane heater again, I've got a great lawyer on speed dial and a community full of neighbors who have my back. Because that's what a real community is supposed to be. People looking out for each other and standing up against petty tyrants who forget that their authority comes from the people they're supposed to serve. My propane heater sits in the basement, a small green cylinder attached to a 9,000 BTU heater that changed everything. It's just a piece of equipment, nothing special, the kind of thing you can buy at any hardware store. But it represented something bigger, a refusal to accept unreasonable authority and a willingness to fight for what was right. And in the end, that's what made all the difference.